All right, we are, I think, actually our last week in Mark for a while before we do get around Easter time. So we're in Mark 10, and I'm going to read verses 46. This is the story of blind Bartimaeus. You all familiar with this? It was one of those stories when I remember the flannel graph. You guys remember flannel graph? Did you guys have that in Sunday school? Where they had a little felt back in the pictures, and they would stick them on there and they would tell the story. And entertainment back when we were young kind of wasn't like it is today, so I was just glued to the felt and watching the teacher do the story. And I remember the story of blind Bartimaeus. It's very short, and as I reread it and as I rethink it, it's kind of like it seems strange. So I thought, well, let's look at this. And it says, this is Jesus. Now, last week we were talking about how James and John, the brothers, and they were talking about who, if they could sit on one on Jesus' right hand and one on Jesus' left, and Jesus rebukes them a little bit for their arrogance. And and right after that, they're walking. They leave Jericho. They reach Jericho. Here in verse 46, it says, "And then they reached Jericho. And as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed him. A blind man named Bartimaeus, and Bartimaeus simply means son of Timaeus, Bar-Timaeus. So it's repetitive. So a beggar named son of Timaeus, was sitting beside the road. And when Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, 'Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me.' 'Be quiet,' many of the people yelled at him. But they only shouted louder, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.'" Very annoying guy. When Jesus heard him, he stopped and he said, "Tell him to come here." So they called him. They said, "Hey, cheer up. Come on, he's calling you." And Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. He goes, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus said, "My rabbi," the blind man said, "I want to see." And Jesus said to him, "Go, for your faith has healed you." And instantly the man could see and follow Jesus down the road. You've heard that saying, that squeaky wheel gets the grease. I don't know if you've, I have this issue where I get in my car, and if I hear something, I'm like, I got to go check that out. And then I get to my destination, I completely forget about it. Until the next time I'm in my car and I'm driving and I hear a noise, and I'm like, I got to check that out. And then I get to my destination, I forget all about it. It's like, okay, I'm going to either have to drive distracted for a moment and try to do speech to text into my phone and say, and I'm not going to say, okay, you know what, because half of your phones are going to start recording me. But if you say the okay G word, and the phone picks it up and you say, "Please put on my calendar to fix my car, to look at my car," I'm not going to do it because I just keep forgetting until I hear it again. I'm not that way. Recently, there was a situation where I went to the dentist. Not my favorite thing to do anyway, but I went to the dentist, and I went to a corporate dental place because I didn't, I had a dentist for a while back, and then they retired or left or whatever, and then I'm like, I don't know where to go. So I just went with this corporate dental place, and it seemed fine and everything else, and I'm kind of self-insured. I've got a major medical plan with Lloyda from King Arthur. So it's like, oh, okay, so we just need, your payment at the end, right? So I'm like, okay, no problem. So I did my thing. They took the x-rays. They did it. They did the cleaning, whatever it is that they did. And then on the way out, I paid, and then like a week or two later, I get a bill in the mail for an extra $165. And it says it had the total of what I paid, but then it said additional charges, $165, and I'm like, oh, heck no. So I call them up. I call up the local branch, and the person, "Hello, welcome to, such and such dental," and they routed me to India, I think. And so I was like, I thought this was a local branch, and like, well, no, this is the corporate branch, and I'm like, well, and I explained the situation. And I said, I paid it all up front. And they're like, well, according to this, there was additional charges. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know. The problem is I had to pay it all. So now I'm getting a little bit like, I'm trying to be cool and calm, being a good pastor, Christian. And there's like, okay, so let's get a hold of, we'll patch you into the actual local location. And so I was talking to the lady in the finance part, and I said, this kind of feels like a bait and switch, where you say one thing and then you come back with more. And she goes, no, I understand. Our financial manager isn't here today, so she'll call you back. Thank you. Yeah, right. Yeah, it didn't happen, right? So a week goes by or so, and then I get another bill in the mail, and I'm like, okay, obviously I'm reminded. I call them back again. I go back to India for a little bit. They route me back to the local office, and the manager still is not in the office, and it's a different day of the week. Now I'm starting to get a little bit annoyed. So each week I call back, and it's the same. I did this like 5 times. Finally, I get a letter saying it's gone into collection. And I'm like, what? Now I'm really squeaking. And the person who gets on there in India, I'm like, listen, you got to patch me into someone who can actually change this. And finally, as I keep asking I was like, well, give me the manager's manager then. She calls me an hour later. Everything's been changed. Everything is fine. I'm like, fine, it took me 7 months to get this thing fixed. But I did. We had a toast later that day. I felt, yeah. Right? Because it feels good. You squeak and you squeak and you squeak, and it's like, listen, this is a pain in the neck, but $165, there's definitely could be worse, but it's the principle. It's not their money. And if it is, they should have charged me to begin with. Right? Do you hear an amen? Anybody? No. All right. We're not that kind of church. Okay, fine. Your nods are fine, okay? I feel it. And I started thinking about that. It seems like certain corporations, certain government agencies, you've got to stay after it. You got to keep talking. And you got to keep calling. And it's like, this is a pain in the neck, but if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. You've got to squeak. This is a little bit of, I think, what's happened with Bartimaeus. Here's a guy who's been blind. Now, probably assuming he's born blind. We don't really know his story. But what's interesting about what Bartimaeus says in this passage is he's probably sitting by the road. I don't know, it doesn't say what he's doing. He's probably begging, because that's what people with disabilities would do back then, because they didn't have regular jobs, and so they would, and part of the culture was you would give to those in need. And so he was probably by the side of the road like he was every day, and he would hear certain cadences and certain things happening, and there were certain parts of the day, and so he was, I'm sure, pretty used to it. And this one day, something is different. There's a lot of chatter. He can hear the people, and he's like, what's going on? What's going on? Something's going on. And they're like, oh, it's Jesus. And he's like, wow, my chance. Now, we don't know. Obviously, he's never seen Jesus because he's blind, but he's obviously heard about Jesus, and somehow he's been convinced that this Jesus is more than just some random guy walking around doing and talking nicely. He says, Jesus, son of David. This is the first time in the New Testament that someone besides his disciples have acknowledged anything about his being potentially the Christ or the Messiah. And so he yells it out, and people are like, dude, shh, like, don't be annoying. He's like, annoying? You haven't seen annoying. He just starts getting louder. And he starts yelling it and yelling it and yelling it. And people are like, Bartimaeus, you're so annoying. And then Jesus like, wait, who's that? It's just some dude over there. Bring him to me. And it's this just moment, I was thinking about this because, I think that a lot of the New Testament stories is referring to how we understand ourselves. A lot of the the stories of the miraculous and people being healed. It's like, well, that's really great, and Jesus had, power, and he's supernatural, whatever. I think it's so much more than that. It's because I think that part of what we have to remember in our own lives is that all of us have a certain amount of blindness in our lives. We're blind to sometimes our own issues. It's so blatant and so glaringly obvious with the people that we are around, their problems. But we have a hard time seeing our own stuff. We have these blinders on sometimes, and we can't always see. There's some people that I know in my life and that I pray for and that I try to work with and deal with that I just feel like they're in complete and utter darkness. I mean, they just walk around constantly stumbling in their lives, constantly hitting things, and just like always hurting, something's always hurting them or going against them. And it's like, have you ever considered that some of that may be you? And I think that until a person gets to that point where they're a little bit, because I feel like Bartimaeus was probably a little desperate. Jesus says your faith has made you whole. And then he just immediately sees. Now, do you remember what he did with one of the guys that we talked about a few years back? A few months, weeks, whatever. Back. Tim picks up some clay and he spits the clay and he spreads it on his eyes. There's someone who couldn't hear and he makes him stick his tongue out. He licks, he's spittle on his finger, hits it on his tongue, and he's like, puts his fingers in his ears, and it's like, what are you doing? Just so weird. And now he's just like, yeah, you're healed. And then everything's fine. He's just like, oh, he can see. And I think each time, it's not that Jesus had to do all these weird things. I think part of it is for us to understand that Jesus uses some of the weirdest things. God uses us, each of us, to be the agents at times of changing people's lives. And sometimes it's just showing someone simple love, just listening to them, just being willing to open your heart to someone who's annoying. And it feels like you're sticking your finger in their ear and doing all these weird things because they're just so difficult. And God's like, yeah, but I've called you to be the one to do that, to help them see. And as you're doing that, I'm going to reveal some things in your own life. Rarely, I think, in my experience, in both my own personal life, dealing with people and others, has someone else, the change that has come in someone else's life, not affected like everybody else around them. I think I was sharing with you one time, there was a guy I knew who was not a faithful guy in his marriage. And he, businessman, he'd tour a lot, go to different cities and stuff like that, and he would be having affairs. And his spouse knew this and understood this and was really not happy with this, but kept forgiving him, right? Kept forgiving him. And eventually, I'm not exactly sure what exactly happened, but eventually he saw his life. I don't know if God, it was one of those aha moments, but he saw what he was doing and it was wrong, and he changed. And he came to faith in this, I mean, he was a person of faith, but he just, like, it grabbed a hold of him, this idea of God and this idea of transformation. And he changed his life, and he started living right and for God and loving and treating his wife with respect and apologizing and being so grateful to her. And about 1.5 years later, she left him. And it was like, what happened? She couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't take the new him. Because it was like, she had to look at herself. Because he wasn't messing. You see, all the other time, all that she had to do was point to him and say, you see, he's bad, 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 bad. And now he's doing good. It's like, ooh, okay, so he's not bad anymore. Not that bad. It's like, but there's still problems. Bad? No. Can't be bad here. It's like, you mean there's got to be something I might need to change too? And God's like, yeah, you all do. Everybody has to do something. We all are And it's so hard to see that. And sometimes when it's thrust upon us, we freak out. It's like, it can't be me. And it's like, well, no one's blaming you for someone else's actions. But we have to look at ourselves and our own actions. We have to be accountable for ourselves. That's the only ones we can control, right? It's just us. And that's hard enough. Nevertheless, trying to control your spouse or your children or whatever, it's like, your boss, no, just not going to work. The other people now is, all you can do is control yourself and try to influence people. And how do you influence people? Is by building trust. And how do you build trust? Is you prove yourself that you love them. Now, it doesn't say what happened to Bartimaeus after this. He just walked away being able to see and was pretty stoked. But it showed beforehand that he had an understanding of his situation and who God and who Jesus really was. And you think by implication, and you hope by implication, that his future self was also following and doing and sharing what God has done in his life. You see, those who know us best, they see the change that takes place in us when we start working on self. But it's hard for them. The people closest to us, now you might go like, all right, so I've been doing keto hardcore. I'm just going to say it, all right, for the last month. Hardcore keto. I'd been cheating a little bit on the side because I get a little stressed out, so I'd snack here and there, all right? I'm sorry. I'm human. All right, I guess, right? You guys have just a little bit. But man, you start cheating just a little bit, it gets a little bigger next time. A little bigger next time. And pretty soon it's like, you step on the scale, it's like, error, and it's like, no, wait, what happened? It's like, oh, I can't cheat. I got to stick with it. And I stick with it, and I'm noticing my clothes getting fitter now. And I'm thinking to myself, Mike, you are looking good. But no one else is saying that, except for maybe my son. Drew's always very encouraging to me. Dad, you look great. Dad, you're looking fantastic. I make my daughter say it occasionally. Well, you don't see it. No, Dad, you look good. Thank you. That's kind of how we work it, right? But it's like, well, why am I doing this if no one notices? It's like, really, Mike? Is that really your attitude? It's like, no, man, you gotta stick with it because it's good for you. It's, all these other things. And it's like the what's the word? Pride, come on, help me out here. When you're feeling, ego, thank you. There's that ego, that wanting to look good, wanting to look better and all that. Yeah, that could be part of it too, vanity, yeah. And it's just this thing where I want change in my life. And physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every way, I want to continue to grow in my life, and I want to improve as I get older. My dad just turned 91 in May. And I call him up, I'm like, hey, Pop. He's like, hey, son. How you doing, Dad? Oh, feeling useless. All I can do anymore is just walk. Because he used to live on 20 acres of land, and he would be working the land. He was like 89 years old. He's up there like sawing a branch off a tree, and the thing falls down on his ladder. It falls over, and my mom's like, okay, that's it. You're not doing that anymore. That's it. My dad's like, well, I survived. So I get that, and I'm like, here's my dad. He's been very active. He's 91 years old, and he's like, mowing the lawn. Now they just moved in recently to a 55 plus where everything's taken care of, and my dad's just like, I just love it here. Just love it. No, he's feeling worthless, and I'm like, well, just try to enjoy it, Pop. He's like, oh yeah, all right, son. Yeah, I feel it. And then I tell him my woes, and he's like, I'm praying for you, son. Everything's relative. And so And so I'm thinking about my dad, and 91 years old, and he's 30-something years older than me. And I'm thinking, Lord, I want those genes. My mom just turned 87, so they have pretty good genes, longevity, and they all look good. And I'm like, well, even my body's bad, I want to look good. Okay, God, that was a joke. I don't care. I'm more about the health. All right, I want to be healthy, and I want and all this. But it's like it doesn't just happen. You don't just take a pill, and now you're just going to be healthy. It's like all that stuff takes work. You've got to watch what you eat. You have to exercise. You got to work out a little bit. You got to walk. You got to use some weights for your joints and all this stuff. And it's like, man, this is a pain in the neck. Just to live long and be healthy. Well, maybe I just want to go out in a blaze of glory. And then it's like, no, you may live long, but you're going to be miserable, right? And I've known people who have had really poor health, and not saying to their own, I don't know why necessarily, but as you start talking to them, and it's like, anyway, my point being is that everything takes work. Nothing comes easy that's good. And we have certain things that we were just born with, certain things that, we feel like are strikes against us, and sometimes it's the families we grew up in. Sometimes it might even be an illness that we had as a child. Sometimes it's the environment in which we raised, or the neighborhoods or whatever. And we can always point to a teacher or a parent or something that's like they influenced my life to be what it is today, and I had no choice in it. And I always say to those people, no, that's true. But you do now have a choice. You have a choice to keep looking back with resentment, or look forward with hope. And this is what God wants in our lives, to continue to look forward in hope. And the things that he brings into our lives that brings healing, we need to continue with those things. And understand that life can be full and abundant. We may not have all the money in the world. We may not even have all the best health in the world. But we can have a joy and a contentment and peace that comes from our commitment with God. All right. Let's pray.